Welcome back to Morning View, Mackinac Uncensored. This was now our third year of this program, and we've got a great lineup of some really very important people with expertise in areas that are so important to Michigan right now.
Absolutely. It's been a great conference, and again, for the third year in a row, we're ending in this fashion, sending people home safely. However, if you need a Bloody Mary before you go get on the horse, we've got a great Bloody Mary bar here in the parlor for you.
Yeah. So Dennis and I were just talking, it's funny that our first session we're going to kick off with is sort of how we ended last year.
These damn roads.
Fix the damn roads. So we're going to talk about a lot of different issues, but our first panel, very, very knowledgeable on this topic. How are we going to fix the damn roads?
I'm anxious to hear. Good morning.
Lindsay, turn it over to you.
Morning. Thank you. Hi, I'm Lindsay Van Hully. I'm a Capital reporter for Bridge Magazine in Lansing, and I am joined today by Paul Ajiba, the director of the Michigan Department of Transportation.
Good morning.
And Regine Bobuff, Vice President and Senior Program Manager for HNTB Michigan, Inc.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I guess just to start, let's start by sort of framing this issue, because everyone knows, roads are bad. We drive over potholes every day. So, if we talk about really what the need is, kind of summarize for us just what the need is right now, how did we get here, and what really happens if we continue where we are?
Well, what I will say is that we did not get here overnight. It took us 40 years of disinvestment in our infrastructure to get this bad. So along the way, we were digging ourselves a big hole. Now to climb out of it, it's going to take a whole lot of money. And I think that's where we are. If you look at the previous administration put a panel together, they did a study before they left office, that the study did show that we needed $2.2 billion. And what the governor is asking for is 2.5. So what that tells me is that the longer we wait, the more expensive it's going to get. The governor did a presentation yesterday, and there was a slide in that shows that in 2 years, right now, our pavement conditions at 78%. In 2 years, if we don't do anything, it goes down to 65%. You can imagine if people are saying 78% is not good enough, if we let it keep sliding down that scale, it's just going to get worse and get more expensive.
And that's 78% of roads in good and fair condition, right?
That is correct. And you hear people say, we don't believe that number because it is just so bad.
Well, and let's talk about that because, in 2015, as we know, we had a package signed into law that created $1.2 billion in funding. Talk about that number and what that did, and how that need is different today from just a few years ago.
Well, in 2015, the legislature passed a bill for $1.2 billion. But what I'm finding out is that this really part of the issue, the public thought the issue, this road funding is solved. The $1.2 billion is only committed $600 million. And that did not kick in till 2017, 2 years after the bill was passed. And the other $600 million is not even kicked in yet. Not going to kick in till 2021. So while we're waiting for the other $600 million to kick in, our roads are steadily going down. So, and quite frankly, that 600 is not guaranteed. That in 2021, the new legislatures may say, well, we are in the red, we don't have the money, we can't afford to give you $600 million. So that's why the governor is saying we should not play the shell game anymore. Let's have dedicated funds strictly to roads that nobody, no other legislatures coming behind us can touch. It will be strictly constitutionally dedicated to the roads.
And so let's talk about the governor's proposal. She's the highlight being the 45-cent gas tax increase spread out over a year. That generates that $2.5 billion that you were talking about. So talk about how that money would be invested, where it would go, and why that's seen as the best option moving forward.
Well, our plan, if you look at the 2015 package, MDOT was on record as saying we needed $1.2 billion just for our system. And when the bill was passed, it was $1.2 billion. And they ran it through the Act 51 formula. MDOT only got 39% of that. So what the governor is saying is that let's not put this package through the Act 51 formula. Let's use this money concentrated on the most heavily traveled roadways with economic impact so that we can start seeing some results.
Regine, what do you think about the governor's proposal? You know, what do you think about what it would do and that idea of putting funding where the most heavy traffic is?
Well, I believe it's a very sensible plan because really those are the roads that take the most pounding and that deteriorate the quickest. And so they also serve economic centers of development. And so that is a sensible thing to do. And I know that others have spoken about other means to raise money for transportation to fix our roads, but actually, as she demonstrated yesterday, first of all, having the 45 cents gas tax gives us a dedicated pot of money to fix our roads that constitutionally we cannot move away from. And the second thing that it does, it actually allows us to right now address an issue that is actually pretty urgent.
And so let's talk a little bit about, kind of the business case for investing in roads. What are the economic implications really of potholes? And you were kind of talking about just that a minute ago.
Well, there are quite a few. First of all, investing in our roads provides us a platform for rapid economic growth. And investing in fixing our roads, is key to sustaining and growing our economic model ecosystem. That actually provides us the opportunity to compete in a globalized economy. We are asking everyone to come and invest in Michigan. But as an example, someone flies in to Metro Detroit and drives on I-94 to arrive to the city. And I don't know if you've driven I-94 from the airport into the city of Detroit. We have plywood holding our bridges. And so it's really hard to make the case that we are the place to invest in. We are the technology, state. We will meet, your needs and your logistics needs when we have plywood holding our, superstructure in place. So if we're giving this message that if we don't invest in ourselves, how can we ask others to invest? And then businesses such as mine, we need to know what the steady stream of revenue is in order to plan, to hire, to grow our talent, to also invest in equipment, technology to make us more efficient in meeting the needs of our client. And by knowing that we have a steady stream of revenue allows us to do that, as opposed to reacting to sporadic, infusion of cash that we've been doing lately. So that doesn't really, and then in addition to that, one of the concerns that we have is talent in this state. And I will tell you that our graduates now, they're very demanding. No one wants to come to work just to fill potholes and also to just remove, the pavement and put 1 inch and a quarter of asphalt over roads. Our graduates, they want to work on creative project, innovative project, on sexy project. I know it's hard for a lot of people to believe that engineering is sexy, but to me, nice laid out concrete road is sexy. And I think people who do work in STEM, that's what they're looking for. They're looking to really do great things. And so we can't compete with other states that are doing them in actually recruiting and retaining our talent.
That 45 cents, though, is pretty steep. And some of the opposition we've seen to that proposal so far is really centered around the size of that. Mm-hmm. There's concerns about how the funding distribution model would favor freeways in urban areas over the local streets that people drive on. I think when a lot of people, when they say fix the roads, it's the streets you drive on every day, right? It's the one you take to work or to school. So how do you sort of make the case to residents in the state that, the size of that gas tax and this new distribution model really is the one that makes the most sense?
Well, I do believe that, first of all, when we raise this amount of money, and we put it, like you mentioned, towards the freeway, and what it does, it frees the money that would be going to the freeways to address the other roads. So we're not neglecting the local road system just because we're investing more into our, our freeways or the roads that need it the most. And I will tell you, 35 cents, it does sound like a lot, but we are actually now spending more in fixing our cars. Our company, we are now the program manager for the Mound Road project in Macomb County, which has been made famous because we talk about the craters that are on Mount. Well, I'll tell you one time, there is a committee that is, that also is an advisory committee to the consulting team delivering this project. And this gentleman is part of the team and is driving to the meeting, and his tire blows. And if you think that fixing the dam road is a colorful language, you should have read the email that he sent regarding the need to fix our dam roads, because he ended up missing the meeting and he ended up spending $850 fixing his car that day. So we do spend money, but we just don't spend it at the pump. We spend it on our cars, and that's a loss of disposable income.
Paul, what do you think?
No, I totally agree. You know, the governor and I have been doing a lot of town halls all over the state. And the one that really stuck out to me was we were in Detroit. And so I brought up the fact that there's a TRIP study that says that the average Michigander spends about $600 fixing their cars. And the lady sitting in the front there blurted out. She said, I spent $1,600 this winter to fix my car. So that's $1,600 that she'd probably never planned for, obviously, that didn't go to fixing the roads. It's just fixing her car. And as the governor said, we're already paying for this. Why not pay for it the right way to fix the roads?
You know, a lot of ideas, I think, and you, I'm sure, probably hear some of these at some of the town halls, but a lot of ideas get thrown around about how to raise money for roads, whether it's gas tax or sales tax, bonding, toll roads come up a lot, registration fees, you know, diverting some general fund spending, you know, making roads a priority within the general fund. What are some of the pros and cons of some of those ideas? And you know, why is the gas tax, at least in your view, the preferred option in this case?
Well, as she said, you know, there's an immediate need right now. As I mentioned, in 2 years, we'll be down to 65% if we don't do anything. The governor said, this is my idea, my plan on how to take care of the problem now. All those other ideas are great. If somebody has a better idea on how to raise $2.5 billion, she's willing to listen. And I think that's a good thing. In my opinion, this is the best plan on the table. It is constitutionally dedicated towards fixing the roads. There is no moving the money around into the general fund or school aid and playing all those crisscrossing shell games. So I think unless we have a better plan to debate, this is what's on the table.
Regine, what about you, as far as looking at gas tax compared to things like bonds or
Well, bonds is really a financing issue, not a revenue necessarily. Well, it's a short-term revenue, but it's really, you have to pay for it eventually anyways, and with interest. But, you know, I looked at all of those, and the gas tax is something that we can do. We do it now. Yes, we talk about registration fees, but you notice that, you know, millennials, they're not buying cars as well. Ford Motor Company is moving away from being a manufacturing, you know, a car manufacturer to being a mobility company. So there is a recognition that people are not buying cars. So registration fees is probably not the best way. I know we talk about vehicles, miles traveled as another option. And I know there are quite a few issues with that, because people are concerned about privacy. We have other states that have tried that. Colorado has had a pilot program, but it lasted about 4 months. It wasn't, but it tells you, the director tells you that it will take 10 years, because you need to have the laws in place, you need to have the guidelines in place to actually implement that. I know Oregon has started a program like this. It's called Orego. But it's limited. It's about 5,000 drivers that are part of it. But if you look at those states, they've already met their baseline. Their road system is in good shape. So now they have the time to think, you know, and also the ability to sit and say, okay, what other tools are there to help us improve on what we already have? And I think what MDOT and the governor, what they're saying is, give us the tools to really, we can be innovative. We are. As a matter of fact, the director has proven that he can be innovative in the US 23 flex route. He can be efficient, but we have to give them the tools to be able to do that. And I think that's what the gas tax does. Let's bring our road to a good condition. And then let's talk about those additional fixes, additional ways, you know, but that will take time to implement, you know, what it takes to, and then we need to study and know exactly how we're going to do that, and we can really take the time in partnership with the legislature, with the MDOT, the state, and also the industry partners to do that.
So we're down to about our last minute or so. So I do want to ask you, to kind of put your crystal ball out there and get a sense of, when it comes to a road funding deal between the governor and the legislature, when do we see a compromise, and what do you think it looks like?
I think there's a compromise ahead. I'm an optimist. I really believe that at the end of the day, we'll get the $2.5 billion.
Do you think it'll all come from the gas tax, though?
Again, it could be a combination of. Again, I think there's a compromise to be had.
Regine?
Well, I believe the legislature and the governor have proven they can work together to make hard decisions, so I see why not on the road funding. That benefits everyone, so we'll see something.
Well, thank you very much for being here. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What a great panel.
That was an interesting discussion.
I hope that Paul's crystal ball is accurate and that we get the whole 2.5, because anything less than that is going to result in more Band-Aids and not permanent fixes.
Yeah, and I think all of our attendees on their drive home will get a good experience of why we need that 2.5.
Absolutely, and as you talk about the drive home, it takes me back to Stephen Kiefer's very passionate presentation yesterday.
yes.
So I would encourage everyone driving home to keep that presentation in mind and don't be distracted while driving.
Exactly. Our next segment is one I'm really looking forward to. It's about influence and impact, Michigan's women in Congress.
Good morning, ladies.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having us today. I'm Sarah Hubbard with Acuitas, a government relations firm in Lansing, and I'm delighted to be here this morning with Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So Congresswoman Slotkin was just elected for her first time last year from a district that spans everything from Ingham County to Oakland County and everything in between. But she came to us from a distinguished career in the Pentagon. We wanted to talk about leadership a little bit today.
Sure.
And so how did your time in the Pentagon prepare you for your time in Congress and inform your leadership style?
Yeah, well, and before I was at the Pentagon, I was at the CIA. So my entire career, I've worked either with or alongside the military, which is a chain of command organization, which is an organization where you put the mission first, where people's egos are secondary to what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that kind of mission-focused spirit is what I bring to Congress. It is somewhat different than the culture of Congress, that's for sure. But the good thing is there is a group of us that were elected in the freshman class, particularly veterans and former intelligence officers. There's 10 of us in the freshman class. And that's my crew. That's who I spend a lot of time with. And we purposely got offices together to remind ourselves to always put the mission and the country before the party and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. It's great to have that network of people. And I know, I've heard you tell some stories about culturally how things are really different in Congress. And, particularly early on, I think as an adjustment maybe, and trying to get the trains running on time, as they say, with some of your colleagues. How's that going?
Well, it's improving, I would say, and I think this is the power of having 101 freshmen out of 435 members, right? 101 Democrats and Republicans all coming at this new. We walked in for orientation the week after we all won in November, and every single meeting started 30 to 40 minutes late. And anyone who's been in any organization, any business knows you cannot run an efficient organization if every single meeting is 30 to 40 minutes late. So the freshmen got pretty involved in basically demanding, particularly on the Democratic side, that things run more efficiently. We actually engaged our leaders about this. We had an election in the Democratic caucus, and the freshmen swung the election based on the candidate who said that he'd run a tight ship. And the next day after he was elected, his name is Hakeem Jeffries, our first meeting that he hosted was 30 minutes late. And we sent a delegation and said, hey, you said you were going to start things on time. And to his credit and to the credit of the leadership, they have really tightened up the schedule, which is, we're on the people's time, right? It's the people's dime. So it's definitely has improved.
That's great to hear. Leadership at that level as well as leadership on policy, they're all important and it all helps you be more successful. How do you come up so I guess in your background, you're in more of a bureaucratic organization. Perhaps issues that you worked on came from above. Now I think the issues you're working on come more from your district and your constituents,
sure.
right? So how are you prioritizing those and providing that leadership in your district and picking those issues that are important?
Yeah, well, the nice thing is if you actually engage with people in your district, they will tell you exactly what they're concerned about, right? And they will tell you at town halls, and they will tell you at coffee hours, they will tell you at public events. They'll also tell you as you're going shopping at Kroger, right? They're gonna tell you.
Yes.
And the things I hear about the most tend to be still the price of healthcare, the price of prescription drugs, and infrastructure, not just our roads, but also water, right? And PFAS and lead. So those are the issues that I tend to focus on because that's what people are telling me they care about the most. We call it radical listening. It's not actually that radical. It's just making the point of listening to good ideas from the district. So my very first bill, the very first thing I co-sponsored was an idea that came, it was during the shutdown, right? The federal government shut down in the first 5 weeks I was in office. And I had a federal worker who was furloughed, who called me from Brighton, Michigan. And he said, here's something that would help. I need to borrow against my retirement plan without a tax, penalty. And it was a smart idea. And so that was the first thing that we did. So I don't think it's hard. It's just not all that common.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and on the other hand, you have this great experience in this, military-style, defense-oriented industry. You have a great committee appointment related to Homeland Security. How can you bring that experience to your policy portfolio and bring more home to Michigan?
Yeah, well, the great thing is I'm on the Armed Services Committee and the Homeland Security Committee. So in line with my background, sort of hard security. And Michigan, we don't, I know right now there's lots and lots of focus on the southern border, but we don't always get the credit we deserve on what we do here to protect the country at the northern border. So between myself and we have lots of members on great committees right now. So the Michigan delegation is poised in this really exciting way to really kind of take defense issues and Homeland Security issues to the next level here in Michigan. We've got 3 of us on the House Armed Services Committee. Gary Peters is on Armed Services and Homeland Security. We've got 2 appropriators. And what I want to do is focus on bringing military missions and defense contracts to Michigan in much higher numbers. And then same thing with Homeland Security. There's a lot more we can do to show off our capabilities here.
Absolutely. It's such a great idea to be able to align those things and find that area of kind of synergy of where Michigan can do more and where you have colleagues in Congress that want to help. So we certainly want to help explore that more. So, I've been really impressed with your constituent services, particularly as far as your social media presence, your newsletters to constituents, and the way you've been able to kind of explore what it's really like behind the scenes in Congress as you've been learning this new job. How did you come up with some of those ideas, and where's that, how's that resonating with your constituents?
Well, I think this is part of just never having run for office in any way, never being a politician. All of this is new to me too. So I just brought in the district, the state, to see what it's like. How do you get your office? It's a big old lottery. How do you do that? What does it mean to have a pin, right? What does this get you on the floor? What does it do and not do? Little things like finding my way through the underground tunnels on the Hill. It was what I was experiencing, so we just brought the district along with it, and people gave really positive feedback saying, I never knew what it was really like underneath, when you lift the curtain. So we just kept doing it, and I think people deserve to know what's happening. We've made our schedule public, so every single week we put out exactly what we've done so that my constituents know how I am spending my time.
Yeah, it's great. So have there been any, besides meeting starting late, any other big surprises you encountered in your first 6 months or so on the job here in Congress? I
mean, I think that it's a very entrepreneurial place, right? It's basically like 435 entrepreneurs. And everyone's representing their district. And we have very different districts, right? There are very different voices, even here in Michigan. And I think what I've been learning about is how do you make it as an entrepreneur after you've been someone in a very strict chain of command organization, right? There's no one telling you, do this today and do this tomorrow. It's all, you deciding how to spend your time. That's a huge opportunity. But then you also realize why there's some people who have been in Congress for 30 years and have kind of an easy time of it, an easy schedule, because they're choosing to kind of just float along. And I think the nice thing about this class is that we were elected with a mandate and a fire under us to do something, to get something done. And that's pretty different culturally from some folks who may have been there for a very long time.
Well, and you're in a situation where that getting something done is going to require bipartisan cooperation.
Absolutely.
It's going to require a lot of coalition building, and it's going to require more than just your colleagues from Michigan.
Yes.
Are there particular areas around the country or people that you've really connected with that you think, oh, we could work together, you know, building those coalitions on some of your priority issues?
Yeah. Well, the nice thing is I was elected with a mandate to work across the aisle, right? The 8th district is a district that's very politically diverse, so I don't have to question what my constituents want and expect of me. They expect me to be working across the aisle. And my Republican colleagues in the Michigan delegation have been fantastic, right? They really, I sat down with each of them. We had in-calls. You know, people have been really welcoming and teaching me, you know, things that, how to work across the aisle, which is fantastic. You will not be surprised that the people I tend to work with across the aisle tend to be Midwesterners, right? So people from Ohio, from Iowa, from Illinois. You learn pretty quickly when you get into Congress how to sift out the show ponies from the workhorses. And unsurprisingly, some of the workhorses really tend to focus from the Midwest, Democrats and Republicans, issues like veterans issues, very bipartisan, right? Workforce development, very bipartisan. So that's where I've tended to spend my time.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we need those kinds of communications with your colleagues around the country.
Yes.
As they don't always think of Michigan first, right?
Well, you know, I got to tell you, that's changing. I think after 2016 and now heading into 2020, I get asked about what's happening in Michigan every single day by my colleagues. I think we're a politically diverse state. We've always been a swing state. You know, my dad was a Republican, my mom was a Democrat. And we are looked at as one of the few places where people are still, I think, willing to put person over the party. And that's rare. So Michigan's gotten a lot of attention. We've seen how many, you know, presidential candidates have already started to cycle through. That'll continue. So from being a place that didn't get enough attention, probably in 2016, we've gotten our fair share, and it will only increase.
Absolutely. Well, you know, our positioning here with the Great Lakes is one of our greatest natural resources,
Yes.
our proximity to Canada, your interest in homeland security. Feels like we have like so much opportunity there as well. You know, have you been able to really get out there and explore, you know, say, outside of the district, for instance?
Sure.
I mean, we've talked a little bit about Selfridge, but are there places around the state that you found like, wow, I could really do more here, or just kind of...
Sure. So a couple of things. I mean, first of all, with the Homeland Security Committee, you know, I've gotten briefs on the Gordie Howe Bridge and how that's going to work. I'm talking with the FBI folks, the Homeland Security folks, the ATF folks, our border folks. So that stuff is outside technically of our district, but obviously fundamental to our state. Up here at Mackinac, having great conversations about the Sioux and going through the Sioux, and I've actually agreed tentatively to go on a freighter through the Sioux, which I could not be more excited
Great.
about. Obviously, the Michigan delegation has agreed to take our congressional delegation down and look at sort of the situation on Asian carp, all outside the district. I think all of it fits into a category, though, that I am interested in developing in my time in office, which is starting to think about environmental security the way we think about homeland security. Because in Michigan, it is about the safety of our kids and the continuation of our way of life. If we pollute the Great Lakes and Asian carp take over, and we can't fish the way our fathers and grandfathers fished in the Great Lakes, that's a change to our way of life, a negative change. In Michigan, you are more likely to hand your child a glass of water that will give him or her a learning disability or an early childhood cancer than you are to be a victim of a terrorist attack. So we need to think about environmental security in a totally different way. It's not some niche issue. In Michigan, it's the most bipartisan issue we have, and we need to start being muscular about how we talk about it and think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, changing gears a little bit back to your leadership style, I guess. You know, a lot of us like to talk about how there are more women in Congress now,
Yes.
but certainly still a lot of men in Congress. We don't have them outnumbered yet. Yet you have a woman as your Speaker of the
Yep.
House. So how, so you're still new to this, but do you have observations on how that might be impacting things? I know you don't have a lot to compare it to because this is your first term, but on the other hand, as a woman and a leader, how is that going, I guess, and how can you change things?
Again, it's colored by my experience of being a CIA officer, doing 3 tours in Iraq, and then being a senior official at the Pentagon. There are not a ton of women in all of those fields. So it's not something that's totally different. We are the class with the largest number of women. But let's just remember, we're still 22% of Congress.
Right.
So we still have a ways to go.
Yes.
And we are also the youngest class in history. We have the most school-aged children. We have the first single mother. So when you have all those women, all those school-aged children, it immediately pushes on the system, which was designed largely for men who tend to be a bit older, right, in their 60s maybe, with a spouse at home, taking care of the home front, kids maybe out of the house. So you can see all these working moms like, stick to a schedule, tell me when we're done voting, I need to get home, I need to get to the soccer game. That's good pressure, right? That's good working mom and working dad pressure. I think also it just creates a different sense of how we use social media. I mean, look, this class is different than even 4 years ago in terms of how we're exposing the public to what happens in Congress. I have 9-year-olds coming up to me at the movies who recognize me and who want to get a selfie with me because they've seen my commercials or they've seen me on TV. I don't remember being a 9-year-old in Michigan and knowing who my representative was. So that's, I think, a good thing. It's created a sense of transparency that I think is fundamentally different.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're certainly looking forward to more of that, and we have many women at the state level in leadership roles now as well, with Governor Whitmer, Attorney General Nessel, Secretary of State Benson, and others. And have you had opportunities to collaborate at the state level yet and find opportunities to kind of bridge that gap between our state and federal government?
Yeah, so it's fantastic. I really do think Michigan is we should be extremely optimistic between what we have going on in the state, what we have going on in our congressional and Senate delegations. We work together all the time. So for instance, on the issue of bringing more military missions and defense contracts in. So you can't do that without the state, right? Gretchen, or Governor Whitmer and Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, are extremely pivotal to that. And one of the things where we can work together is, for instance, I have contacts at the Pentagon and I say, how do I bring active duty missions back to Michigan, right? You're the head of the Air Force, tell me how I do that. And the head of the Air Force said to me, it's all about the spouses. Right? If I want to get people to move to a new place and not have them leave the Air Force, they are going to want to bring their entire family. Do you have reciprocity for things like teaching certificates, right? So if a spouse is teaching in Florida, can he or she come and teach in Michigan without going through recertification? That is something that our state legislature can work on in a bipartisan fashion tomorrow, right? And so that's how you kind of work hand in glove on taking us to a new level. And I think that our governor and our lieutenant governor are perfectly poised as she walks by to do that and do it in a really fantastic way.
Yeah, that was good timing.
Yeah, it was great timing.
Good morning, Governor Whitmer.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. And there is an interest at the state level, as I've worked on some issues about interstate medical licensure compacts, interest in interstate compacts related to nurse licensure and things. So certainly it's a great opportunity to do more of that.
Yeah. So, and it's, Michigan, as we saw this, over this conference, Michigan has a lot to teach Washington about how it is still possible to work together, right? I think a lot of the polarization and the vitriol has been imported from Washington, but Michigan was always a place where we were able to get things done, even when we had different political views. And I don't want to lose that. And I think that we need wins. We need to hit singles and make sure that we can still demonstrate to the public that Republicans and Democrats can and will work together, even if Washington can't seem to do it.
Yeah, I've been working in and around politics for a long time, and some of the biggest wins I've seen as far as helping solve intractable issues has been under bipartisan government.
That's the way that we have passed some of the most groundbreaking legislation of our country's history is on a bipartisan basis. There is no such thing as a one-country party, or one-party country, and we shouldn't be aiming for that. It doesn't make sense. We need two healthy parties with empathy, who have different views on the role of government. That is the history of our country, and that is a good, healthy tension.
So if you could look in your crystal ball and think about where you want to be in, say, 10 years, are you thinking, I'll talk a little bit more so you can think about that. Well, let's say you're still in Congress, maybe we can narrow it to that. What kinds of things would you hope to achieve in 10 years, whether it's politically or process-wise or leadership or policies you're thinking about? I mean, are there specific things you're building strategies really for the long term on?
Yeah, well, I think two things, two different pieces. One here at home with constituent services and with engaging with the public. I would love to be able to say, hopefully not in a decade, maybe in 5 years, that Congresswoman Slotkin really changed the way I think about how to interact with my representative. I never thought about it before, but now I actually access the services that my congressional representative is offering on things like veterans benefits, Social Security, tax benefits, and she's out there and present in a way that I hadn't ever really experienced. So that's on the constituent services side. 5 years from now, not a decade, I want to be able to say, with the help of our private sector, our governor's office, our delegation in Washington, that we have taken our defense industry to a totally new level. And we are now up there with the big dogs, Texas, Alabama, and getting our fair share of all those defense contracts and military missions commensurate with what we can do in this state. And that, to me, is exciting. It's jobs for a generation. It's showing off what we can do. And I think that that's a super exciting thing to work on.
Well, we've certainly seen one of the keys to success, particularly in government, is knowing what you want.
Yeah.
Starts with that. May seem
Yeah.
obvious, but knowing what you want is critically important. And my sense is you have a pretty good idea of what you want to accomplish, so that's great. I think we just have about 30 seconds left. Anything else you'd like to share with our friends and the viewing population here, or the Detroit Regional Chamber members?
Yeah, I just think, Mackinac, first of all, this is my first time actually in the conference. Last year I was
Welcome.
a candidate.
It's my 25th.
I was too cheap to actually buy a ticket, so we just came and met people in like the ice cream parlor and whatnot. So it's great to be here, and I think it's a real example that other states and other places can emulate of how industry and the government world, policymakers, journalists can come together. I think someone should make a Hollywood movie out of it, quite
Yes.
frankly, and all stuck here on
Who
the
would
island
play you,
together.
right?
No.
I don't know.
And I just think it's a fantastic thing that other states should emulate.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's a very special event, and never found anyone else who does anything quite like it. So thank you so much for
problem.
being here.
Thank you.
This morning, Friday morning, we're going to start heading home soon.
That's
and
right.
Really appreciate your participation today.
Of course. Thanks for
you.
having me.
Thank you. Thank you, and back to Tammy and Dennis.
Thank you. Congresswoman Slotkin is so impressive.
She's amazing.
going to be so good for our state.
It's refreshing to see someone with that much energy and passion and expertise. And when you talk about women in leadership, I think that we have to commend your team at the Chamber. With Wendy and Megan and all the rest of the team that you have. Sandra, you all do such a phenomenal job and set an example to how you can have diverse leadership and be extraordinarily successful.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Another great topic. You must be very happy about this one.
Future leadership. I got my man up there too, Senator Marshall Bullock and company. You guys take it from here. Good morning.
Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. And yes, we have State Senator Marshall Bullock to my left, not politically speaking, of course, as a journalist. And then Selma Tucker, Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Public Sector Consultants. Two leaders, absolutely. What number conference is this for you?
One as a senator.
Selma?
6.
Number 6.
Yeah.
So as you look around now with some conferences under your belt, there isn't a little bell, right, that goes off when a new political young leader is walking by. So how do you spot one?
Well, thankfully, they're not in their parents' basements anymore. They've graduated from that. They're walking around. They're probably a little bit shell-shocked, but they are very, very snappily dressed. They look good. But if you're really looking for the next political class, I think you've got to look for people who are really active, particularly in the nonprofit space, people who are in the advocacy space, because we're just seeing a groundswell of support from people who are sort of frustrated with the political system and are wanting to get involved, and that's why you're seeing all these candidates. And we talked about 2018 being the year of the woman. You have all these candidates who are running for office who never considered doing it before, and I think that's a wonderful testament to where the body politic is and how folks are sort of seeing themselves engaging in the democracy that we have.
Senator?
Well, I think that, as well as just us engaging. See, I think it's time for us to engage more young people, go to the schools. When I was in school, civics was a big part of our lessons every day, and so you just knew about it. I wasn't growing up to be in politics. I wanted to be an engineer, but I kind of stumbled into this. But you find people in all the odd places. You don't have to just be a political science major. Like you said, working in the nonprofit space, or, just if you actively engage and plant the seeds right, folks will start to see that they belong in the process. And so you kind of cultivate that. So that's what I want to do.
Well, so let's think about our two most recent governors. You have our governor right now who really took on a young leadership role early on in terms of going right into the legislature. Governor before that, absolutely no political experience before he ran for governor. If you are talking about the next generation of political leaders, is there one path that's better to like work your way up, or do you just like jump and dive right in?
See, I like to jump and dive right in. I like the non-traditional path. Like
Yeah.
I've never ran for office. I ran for office and won. Woo! Hey, thank you. And so that's where I'm coming from. I mean, there are folks who work in corporate America. There are folks who work in nonprofit. There's a couple teachers that are now in the Senate that never ran for office.
Yeah.
So you can find us anywhere, but you have to show them the path. That's all I want.
Yeah, well, you see a lot of politicians now, and Rick Snyder is a really good example of that, who are taking meteoric rises and are taking risks, right? You know, they're saying, and obviously Rick Snyder is not necessarily in that millennial generation, but
No.
you do have these young people who are saying, why not?
Right.
What do I have to lose? I might as well jump in. I feel like things are not exactly working out for me. You know, national student debt has topped $1.5 trillion, and it's growing at an alarming clip every single year. And so these folks are wanting answers and are a little bit frustrated at the fact that the previous generations haven't seemed to get their handle on some of these major issues. So they're jumping in feet first, and I think you're going to see them being very, very aggressive.
And they have tools at their disposal, technology, things that, folks who were in order, you had to walk, knock every single door, didn't have a van list. You had to call every single person. Now you can just touch a button. You got a cell phone that emails everybody, blast every tweet, all that.
Yeah.
What do you think is the impetus for this next generation wanting to be so engaged? Is it an environmental factor? What's going on?
I just think they're looking at what's going on in society today, whether you're looking at the national stage or your local stage, and they're not happy.
Yeah.
And if you're not happy, you have to do something.
Well, and they want to see their values reflected in the leadership of their local government, in their state, at federal office. I mean, you just heard from Alyssa Slotkin in this previous session, and she's someone who is an unorthodox candidate with a distinguished military background, and she said, I'm going to jump into this thing, and I'm going to go up against a political juggernaut, and I might get bounced around, and it may not work out. It worked out for her. It was quite the upset. I might get bounced around, and it may not work, but she took the risk. She took the risk, and she said, I'm going to do it, and guess what? She upset that apple cart, and other people see that trailblazing happening, and they're coming out in really, really high rates. So they're wanting to see themselves, they're wanting to see solutions and issues that are being talked about that are not being talked about by perhaps a political class that is focused on other things.
Yeah, I think that they're seeing more and more non-traditional folks in office. Folks are taking a chance. I mean, we brought up Rick Snyder, but there's a younger generation who's also doing the same thing, who's never held office, who just jumped in and won or put up a pretty good campaign, and so they're like, hey, we can do this. And so
what are the barriers then right now, whether it's institutional barriers that are standing in the way of someone who is ready to jump in?
Well, where are they? So like, how do I know who you are? So you have to be engaging, and we also have to go and engage people, find people, because people notice things in you that you may not see in yourself. I'll use myself as an example.
Please.
I had no idea I was running for office.
You didn't?
No, I didn't. But I worked on a campaign that I believed in, and someone saw something in me and brought me into that organization, and I worked in municipal government. And then I just evolved myself and was like, hey, this time to do this.
Yeah.
Well, Senator Bullock, what he didn't say is that he was inspired, but he also had the hustle, right? He said, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to work my tail off to make sure that I can get there. And even if I fall short, I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to do it again. That's why you have so many people. I'll give a shout out to the Michigan Political Leaders Program. You've got these folks who are saying, I'm going to go into this, I'm going to learn, I'm going to get as trained up as I possibly can. And you're seeing I I believe, pretty crushing demand from that program in particular and leadership programs across the state. I know I was with one in my alma mater, Grand Valley State University, and you have these folks who are going into these programs wanting to get skills, wanting to get these chops so that they can apply them right away.
Yes. Future Leaders, Leadership Detroit, all of those MPL, all of those groups are the ones that folks who want to get in, but then there are folks on the peripheral who don't know about those programs, and where do they get noticed? They get noticed at work, they get noticed by another friend, they get joined by a campaign, so they have to want to get in, and we have to pull them in.
So whose job is it then, right, to find those people? I mean, you are now in state government. Is it on you to be a mentor?
Well, yes, sort of. I think so. So, like, again, going back to what he said, I had the hustle, but working on the campaign, I also hustled for that campaign that I believed in, and someone on the team who had that was seasoned said, I like that guy. And so they pulled me in and was like, you should start thinking about other things in this that I hadn't even thought about. So.
Well, I think mentorship is incredibly important, and I also think that young people who might be considering this need to, and as a young person, still a millennial, and not even at the tail end of millennial, I couldn't believe this. I'm like in the middle.
I'm not a millennial.
Who are asking themselves, how do I get involved? And they are finding their own path. I think that the paths that they take are trailblazing. We're going to see these people coming from out of the woodwork, from whether they're working on their school board, whether they're working for environmental issues, whether they're working in something that is getting them motivated, and they may have found something on Facebook or Twitter. And the fact of the matter is, these platforms are so sophisticated now. What they're doing is that they are being, and we are all operating in our bubbles, but they are being inspired by the information that they see, good or bad, and they are really, really, in a lot of cases, upset, and they're fed up, and they're saying, we're going to jump in whether you like it or not, and we're going to take this thing over by storm.
And generally, it's just one issue that pisses them off, and they're like, I'm going to do something about that. And then they go into research mode. I mean, they can own a restaurant or be a cook. They're like, I'm going to find out what this problem is. I mean, auto insurance was like that for me a little bit. I had to figure it out. So, you know.
Well, and that's what's so interesting, right, in the legislature right now, how there are teachers, there are scientists, right, and folks that are coming from just different backgrounds and not necessarily, well, I majored in poli-sci, therefore I'm going to go be a future political leader.
Yeah, I think we got to look outside that bubble. But I mean, that's good that you know political science and things like that. But I think everyone is capable of doing this if they put the work in.
Well, military service is a big one, too. You see a lot of folks who are running and who are winning, especially in some of those upset races. We know John James had this distinguished military career, and you have these people who are getting into this space and are saying, I was in Iraq, I was in Afghanistan, and now I'm trying to figure out how I can put my print on the policies that are sending our people overseas, that are putting our people in harm's way, and maybe they agree or maybe they disagree with those policies, but they're still motivated by something. And that's a place we've always seen people operating out of sort of that class, and we have. I think we don't have any. I don't think we have anyone left in the legislature who was from World War II, but I might have that wrong. But
Congress,
in Congress,
DC.
yeah, I think we've pretty much lost those champions, and we're getting a new block of people who are saying, I'm going to step into this space, and so I think we've got to look at lots of different places, and it's not going to be this traditional path, and I think the parties are going to have are going to have their work cut out for them because the political class, the people who are in that traditional lane, are not getting the traction, are generally not getting the interest. I mean, you look at Barack Obama and his meteoric rise, and you look at Hillary Clinton and that energy was not there. So Donald Trump, we all know that story.
Yeah, they're looking for the new champion. So it's non-traditional paths. I didn't work I wasn't a staffer and then went on to work in someone else's staff and then became their chief of staff and then ran for office. You know, it was like I worked on a food truck and now I think I'm gonna, go back to school and be, I got a social work degree and I'm gonna be the next city council person. And folks are taking that chance. And more young people are running for major offices out of college. And I like that.
Do you think that there is something that is better for the state, whether it is a political leader who starts out from a food truck or one that starts as a staffer? I mean, there's got to be pros and cons, right?
Somewhere along the way, after having conversations with everyone, people recognize whether you get it or don't. And so if you get it, or if you got the heart and the desire and the hustle to learn all the information on both sides of the issue, people will tend to gravitate towards you. And some people just got that energy, or people just come to them.
Well, we live in a representative democracy, and the point of that is that we are supposed to have people who are representing our interests, and that means that those interests are as diverse as this country. And diversity doesn't mean, you know, a seven-figure bank account and an age that is well over the median age in the country.
I'd like to have that.
Well, working in public service, you might not get there, but when you leave, I mean, the numbers aren't so bad. But it really is. I think that so your question is, is there a good makeup? I think that the makeup needs to be representative, and that because it wasn't representative and because it was so imbalanced, that is partly why you're seeing this groundswell that is coming up and saying, I want a more focused, I want a more perhaps aggressive stance, and it's coming sort of out of that red hot anger, and that just is not where we've seen a lot of our politicians before. They've in a lot of cases they've been groomed. We do see those meteoric rises, but these folks are coming in from really I don't want to say odd places, but untraditional places, and that is because you're going to see a much more diverse field, not just in terms of race, but also in terms of gender and perspective and places where they're coming from in the economy and their economic perspective.
And I think, service was part of my DNA, but I think what really changed for me is when I became a parent. And so then I started thinking about where my kids are going to go to school, and then I was like, school suck. How do I help? Where do I need to go? How do we make this better? And those things evolved in my thought process. And so I think we can start earlier.
So in the final couple of minutes that we have, the question for me and Selma, you already brought up millennial. It seems like sometimes it has become kind of a dirty word, right? And so hey, I'm one too. But for a political leader, right, who right now is listening and going like, I'm in, I want to jump in, I want to do this, do they need to identify as a millennial? Like, is that a helpful way to run, or is it just so diluted at this point to use that word?
Oh gosh, I'll answer the question as a millennial. I won't answer from a 30,000-foot perspective.
Yeah.
If I want to vote for someone, I want you to be, and this is universal, whether you are a millennial or you are a baby boomer, you want to vote for someone who has an agenda. You want to vote for someone who has a focused mission, and that's regardless of your age. And I think the millennial is going to come out in your positions, and the millennial needs to come out in your style. The millennial needs to come out in the way that you approach governing. I don't think you have to go around ringing the bell, I'm a millennial. Guess what? Everybody knows that. And I would rather hear you talk about the issues in a way that is going to engage not just me, but a broad swath of the electorate.
30 seconds.
Well, I think every generation who was labeled by the generation prior to them, if you didn't work to their standard.
Right.
And so I don't think it's a dirty word. I just think folks don't see them working at the same standard because of technology. And so, but like he said, a lot of those folks have gone on. And so now I just think you just got to work hard, and people will recognize if you're working hard and you're dedicated to something. And so it doesn't matter what your age group is.
Amen. Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And future political leaders, talk to these two. Find these two guys. Thanks, everyone.
Well, that was pretty interesting to hear. I think I look around this conference more and more, and I see the electeds that are here and the younger age, and they are very, very aggressive. We do have good hope for the future.
I think it's refreshing, and I think when we talk about millennials and how they may work differently, I've got an office full of them, and there is, I think, a generationally different approach. But these are some of the hardest working folks that I've come across. They just work differently, but they grind it out.
And they care. They care, and they just want to do what's right and do better. So I think you combine all that in, and that's a great future for us.
And speaking about issues that people care about, Chad, this is a very interesting one. Gerrymandering is a huge issue, not only in Michigan, but across the country. So I'm very interested to see what your panel has to talk about. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks a lot. About a month ago, I wrote a column for Crane's Detroit Business, and the headline was "The Agenda in Lansing Just Got Gerrymandered." And I suggested that at the time that Dan Gilbert should just go ahead and form his ballot committee now for no fault, because nothing is going to get done in Lansing. Maybe that was a little too skeptical on my part, because 6 weeks later, we've overhauled the entire auto insurance law. There's seemingly movement on a road deal, maybe. and maybe we'll even get a budget, possibly before August. This is kind of intertwined with the whole larger issue of redistricting. But I wanted to start out just kind of talking about, just from you guys' perspective, a little bit politically, how things are changing in Lansing right now with the cloud that looms over the legislature, that if the Supreme Court does rule or does uphold the federal judge's ruling, that we will have a redistricting marathon this summer.
Well, listen, I think that what we're seeing is people saying we want to try to do whatever we can to make elections fair and transparent. That's what the ultimate goal was of voters, not politicians. That's why 61 or 67% of Michiganders voted for gerrymandering to stop, for redistricting to start. So I think that the reality of it is that the people have spoken, and so hopefully that is something that we will do, because the reality is we just want elections to be fair and not to be drawn according to party on both sides of the aisle, right? Not Democrats, not Republicans. Let the citizens speak for themselves.
I neglected, I've my sleep-deprived self. I forgot to introduce my guest.
That's
here.
quite all right.
Portia Roberson. She is the CEO of Focus Hope and also a longtime former city executive. And John Selleck, he's the CEO of Harbor Strategic Public Affairs and Republican political consultant. John, your take on sort of where things stand with the legislature kind of trying to move forward and do things, big things, before the possible tsunami hits.
Well, you know, one thing of the many I thought about during the conference is we've been around business for a long time. When they talk about their policy wants in the general sense, they always talk about wanting predictability, and they want certainty. And what the district court decision has injected is a ton of uncertainty. It's put uncertainty into this conference, into the business community and what they think is going to happen going forward. And like you're getting at, in Lansing. And some people could probably argue, well, no, it didn't. Look what happened with Auto No Fault. They got it done. What I think that is a testament to Shirkey, Chatfield, Greg, Ananick, all of them, to put that aside. It's their internal discipline to say, I can deal with that over here in this compartment. But right now, I still have an opportunity to get things done. So it really says a lot about them that they're still able to accomplish what they've done and hopefully what they can still do.
Yeah, maybe I was just sort of writing on experience, because in past there might have been some different legislative leaders who would have just decided, okay, we're done. let's ride this one out till the courts make a decision.
Well, that was certainly the case when I worked in the House as a staffer back in 07, 08, after Governor Granholm already won re-election. They were at war the entire time, the Republican leaders and the governor, the entire time. If this had been put into the mix, it would have been even worse at that point than it was now.
Yeah, so we're talking about 34 districts, legislative districts between congressional, Senate, and House. Tell us a little bit about what would be the impact if we, Portia, if the Senate has to have a special election for a dozen or more of the seats.
Well, there's no question it's going to be a heavy lift. I mean, and people will argue that because of that, we should not do it. But the reality of it is like I said, people want this. And so when the will of the people speaks through the voting process and they say that they want to do this, regardless of the heavy lift that it is, it's important to take care of it. I mean, the reality is across the board, we've seen redistricting, again, from both parties, where it is redistrict in someone's favor. Fair, transparent, impartial elections are what people want to see. And I think that when you do it that way, what you get is, although I think compromise happened on the island this week, and I think it was amazing to see everybody come together and get something done, I think you have a better chance of having that be the norm and not an oddity that we have celebrated this week, because you have the people there that the people want to be there, and they will work together to get things done.
John, obviously this lawsuit was brought on by the League of Women Voters challenging this and challenging a Republican-drawn map. And then you have separately of the constitutional amendment. It doesn't really kick in until after the next census. So what's the dynamic right now for Republicans? I mean, that uncertainty about just the specter of possibility that the Senate Majority Leader himself could be ousted out of office by this.
Right, you factor that in. You factor in Jim Ananick woke up one day and thought, oh, there might be a chance to reset everything and I could have a Democrat majority with a Democrat governor. And oops, I won't be here.
Right.
We're all human. That weighs into your mind no matter who you are. You know, Chad, I think the bottom line is that the current system it doesn't work. We've got 50 years of experience of redistricting going to the courts over and over again. I don't know if you've taken the time to read the House Fiscal Analysis on the history of redistricting in Michigan, going back to the 30s, but I did, so I'll save you a minute. It's ridiculous, it's long, it's winding, it's twisting. It always ended up court, and why is that? Because the system is set up for each party to put forth the best plan that works best for them to achieve their policy goals. So I'm left looking at the whole thinking of that old saying, don't hate the players, hate the game.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Well, John, how confident are you that that this redistricting commission will be nonpartisan and above reproach?
Well, we'd be naive if we thought that any part of this process, the old system, the new system, is going to be nonpartisan. I won't say it's a joke, but there's too much influence and too much power and too much need to try to impact what's going to happen for that to be the case. My friends over at Martin Waymeyer, like Elizabeth Batiste and Dave Waymeyer and Roger Martin, they did a great job. They ran a great campaign. They believe, everybody over there believes in the system they put in, but you're a mechanical guy. I think of like a system they'll talk about in mechanics where it's a sealed system. So if a gear breaks inside or the oil goes bad, you can't crack it open and fix it. And that's what Proposal 2 does. I mean, it even shuts the courts out of potentially being able to step in and solve a crisis in the situation. That plan also, in the end, allows the partisan elected Secretary of State to do the final selections of who's on the board, even though they went to a lot of steps to try to make it random and nonpartisan. So every system, I guess maybe is the bottom line, is going to have partisan influence and it's going to have differences. But like I said earlier, we've got 50 years or so with the current system. It wasn't working. Everyone's going to adjust to the new rules, and we'll get going. We'll see how that goes.
Portia, in Detroit, there's some pretty funny
lines drawn.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the 4th Senate district. It somehow connects Wyandotte and 8 Mile. And it's pretty creative, and obviously the 14th congressional district, I call that the snake. That connects Pontiac and Southwest Detroit. That was quite a feat.
I recently moved about a year ago, 3 blocks from where I'd lived previously, changed congressional districts. I consider myself a little politically astute. Took me a while to figure out who was my congressperson. I kept thinking, wait, what district am I in? So, I mean, those are the kind of things that I think, people want to see change. I mean, the point of doing the redistricting the last time and the way it turned out for the congressional districts just doesn't make sense, to be completely honest. It just doesn't make sense. And now in Detroit, we're facing the idea or the possibility that one of them, we might lose one of them, right, altogether. And so then you're talking about one person representing all of Detroit and some other areas, some outlying areas that they pick up, and does that make sense at all? So, I mean, I think that, again, there are going to be some challenges in a new system, but we have seen that it hasn't worked in the past, and so change is always good.
Well, and in the past, incumbents of both parties have been protected. I mean, certain members of Congress, some of whom have since retired, or in John Dingell's case, passed away. They got deals for themselves in the process. I mean, I mentioned the 4th district because a certain senator who left office under a cloud of criminal problems. He got a great little deal for himself that kind of kept a certain state rep who now is a member of Congress who's. Drawn the ire of the president, Rashid Tlaib. That kept that district entailed and easier for Virgil Smith to win. But so these deals go on both sides, don't they, John?
Yeah, I think they do, and I think that's why I wouldn't envy playing the role of the folks who had to draw the maps for either side. Because the bottom line is, up until this time, if you're going to have knowledgeable people drawing the maps, there are people that have run elections, won elections. Yeah. They're in contact with their elected officials. And then when one of their elected officials calls or sends an email or a text or whatever and says, hey, what about this township? Or how about I'm thinking about moving over here? What are they going to say? They can say no, but they're going to feel that pressure to do something about it. So you talk about deals, but sometimes it's as simple as I don't want to upset Congressman X or Congressman Y.
Yeah, well, we've seen some of those emails out of that lawsuit. They've been quite eye-opening experience. I think probably got some people reconsidering FOIA for the legislature after that. But looking forward, as you've been at this conference, you've both been at this conference many times before. What do you get? I mean, what was your sense of the political dynamic here, right? Because everyone was obviously taking their victory lap yesterday on the porch over auto insurance. But how is it different than any previous conferences?
I guess I would say, listen, I think the governor set the tone, and I think both parties came to the table, compromised, seeing something actually happen. And again, I know it happened in Lansing, and there was a signing here on the island, but the reality of it is seeing it happen just is refreshing. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I was more excited that I did it. We're not going to be talking about auto insurance for the next 10 years, as we've been talking about it basically my entire adult life, right?
Right.
So to be able to put one issue, just one issue to bed for a while, so we can move on to other things, fixing the roads, the budget, all of those other things. And so I hope that this week was a catalyst for that kind of compromise going forward. What I do know is that people across this country are tired of gridlock and nothing happening from any elected official at every level. So Michigan, I think, this week showed that we can lead the way in compromise and not getting everything we want. Nobody gets everything they want. That's the definition of compromise, right? And I will say over and over again that, I don't care where you go, I don't care how rabid a party member you are, you still want things to get done by the people you've elected. And so we proved that we could do that this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it happened right over here, right behind us.
Yep.
The bill signing took place. I think I made a reference to 07, 08, and there were a lot of good people in the legislature and the governor's office back then as well. I don't mean to rain on the parade, but it was a vastly different situation than what we saw here. They certainly weren't all standing together. We were up all night fighting it out over budgets and government shutdowns. I think the difference here, to some respect, is every one of the leaders right now, we're at a very fortunate time, are pragmatic. We're in one of the most partisan, divisive, crazy political atmospheres the country's seen in a long time. Yet every one of these people, what are the chances of that?
Right.
Mayor Duggan,
Right.
Governor, Senate Majority Leader Shirkey, Speaker Chatfield. I mean, Senator Shirkey stood up there and said, "I'm proud of my governor." Yesterday.
I know, I heard that.
That's the main
right.
thing.
Yeah,
Stuck
he
out
says
to me.
this
That
is
was
my governor
huge,
over
my
and
governor.
over. And earlier today, we asked the governor what he thought or what she thinks of him saying, using the phrase "my governor," and her response to Rick Pluta was, "I'm not sure what to think of that yet." So it was. Everyone's kind of still getting to know each other here. We're 5 months into this, and it has to help. I mean, the dynamics between now and 07, 08, and the meltdowns of those later Granholm years, it has to help that the economy is booming, and for most people, the wind is at their back. The state has got flushed with revenue. They're not cutting $1 billion out of the state budget this
Right.
year. So doesn't that always kind of make things a little easier?
Yeah, it probably does. I set you up to give a compliment to all those people.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks for answering my circular question here. What else? What was there something? Oh, John, one thing, just a note for the audience here. You were the Republican strategist for Bill Schuette, so you were up against Gretchen Whitmer. You spent the last 2 years of your life trying to figure out how to defeat her, and that didn't work out. What has surprised you about Governor Gretchen Whitmer?
My experience when I was in the legislature, when I was in the House, was that she was the first person to the mic to try to take us down. I was on the floor every day. I was lucky enough in my staff job to be on the floor and witness what was going on all the time. And she wasn't the only one, but she was the lead. She was the lead dog on doing those things. And so our caucus came to see her as the person that they were going to go to war with all the time. I think in that respect, a lot of reporters thought that's how she would probably carry herself as governor. Maybe that's the source of your question. Instead, what she's done has been very pragmatic from the get-go. And that's just a smart strategy. She's seen it work for Governor Snyder to some extent. She saw it work. Governor Engel worked for him. It's not a Republican thing. It's just a governing thing. She's had to make strategic decisions on a lot of things that are going on in policy issues like the literacy lawsuit, on shutting down schools like in Benton Harbor. They're just things when you get to be governor, you realize, okay, I've got to do something slightly different than when I was in the legislature. And that would be the case for anybody that became governor.
Portia, what has surprised you so far about Gretchen Whitmer as governor?
Well, it doesn't surprise me because I think instead of saying that she was always the one who was first to the mic to take someone down, I think it was more about showing her ability to lead. And I haven't been as surprised as others may have been about that leadership and what she's shown. I do think that she has been pragmatic. I do think that she has shown a willingness to compromise. I loved yesterday in her keynote address when she talked about knowing people. I think that is so significant, and knowing facts about people who are in different parties than you. I don't think we get anywhere as a state if we refuse to talk to one another. And yes, we're different, and we can acknowledge some of those differences, but in a lot of ways, we're a lot alike, right? So she was talking about who had 12 kids and or 12 grandchildren and who had 5, and it's like, wait, she gets it. She gets that we have to talk to one another. We have to acknowledge we have differences, but we have a lot of similarities, and that's going to make everybody feel more comfortable, I think, sitting down at the table, because they don't see her immediately as their adversary and somebody they have to challenge on every issue.
Yeah, and sometimes there are extremes on that, Chad. There will be people that are really good at being a politician and talking and shaking hands across this room. There are some that are more comfortable with their laptop behind a closed door, like Governor Snyder. She seems to have both.
Yep, she does.
Yeah, she did that during her inaugural address. She called out every legislative leader, talked about how Mike Shirkey likes to go home to Jackson every night and have dinner with, I think his wife's name is Sue, and then Lee Chatfield has got 4 or 5 children and quite an active life and such, and so having that kind of relationship with people. I mean. And Mike Shirkey is into that. I mean, when they passed the bill last Friday, and we had the little scrum in the Senate, someone asked, "How did you guys get this done?" And he said, "Well, it goes back to the definition of the originality of the word politics." People talking to each other, and we've been talking to each other, and we're building trust, and so that's different, and even it's different than even the last term. I mean, Rick Snyder didn't have these kind of relationships.
It is, and I actually think that stuck out. It's interesting you bring that up. I kind of forgot about it. When a few people on Twitter and stuff heard the governor mention those lines in that speech, they weren't ready for it yet. Right. They didn't know what was coming. They're like, wait, what did she just say? What's that all about?
Why is she talking about my spouse?
Right.
But it's talking about what matters to you.
Right.
And then you can relate to someone on a more personal level and such. And so that's...
You're ultimately going to trust someone who you feel has taken the time to know a little bit about who you are and how you operate in life and who's your family member and what's important to you. You have a little bit more confidence in sitting down with them, and maybe even a little bit more confidence in giving up a little bit in terms of that compromise, because you realize that, like, listen, they know your children's names too, so they're not going to do things, or you're hoping at least you have some confidence that they're not going to do things that are going to hurt your family, because they've recognized that your family is just like her family.
Yeah. Yeah, and she has that Brady Bunch family she likes to talk about too. So, in our final 2 minutes here, give me both your take on what happens for the rest of the year here. What's the rest of in politics? What's the rest of 2019 look like, John?
Predictions for the future, John.
And Portia's going to be wildly successful.
My prediction was totally off.
Right.
About the agenda in Lansing being gerrymandered. What do you think is going to happen in the next 7 months?
Predictions are fun. I think what we saw yesterday is that this governor trusts Mike Shirkey and Lee Chatfield. She didn't make them deliver a road solution at the same time that she signed off on what they wanted to do first, which was auto insurance. So clearly they've got a good relationship right now, and it's existing inside, I won't say in a bubble, but it's existing inside when the outside world is going a little bit nuts right now, and that's a really good sign. And what the conference helped do is good timing, because another bubble here of people encouraging them, please, keep on going down this road. The problem is, in general, like with every election cycle, they usually say, well, the first year we'll get something done of the 2-year cycle, and the second year we won't. Everything is working against them to speed that clock up and have it come earlier and earlier. But so far, they're showing the discipline to ignore it.
Yeah, I'm hoping that, this sense of compromise continues. I mean, again, I think, as John said, it's so great that we were up here, because I think the governor said, go and talk to somebody who's in the opposing party. When you're walking around today, when you're on the patio, make sure you say to somebody, hey, listen, I like that compromise on auto insurance. Let's keep that going. And I think, again, Michigan has the ability to be at the forefront of what people want to see across this country. And the divisiveness, listen, it makes for good cable TV ratings. It does not make for good governing. And people want to see good governance from the people they entrust. She said it yesterday, I think it was Stacey Abrams in her keynote said, we are proxies for the people that have elected us, and we speak for them. And what people are saying across this country is enough. We're tired of arguing. We're tired of nothing getting done. Get together, pull us together, and get things done. And Michigan did that this week.
John Selleck, Portia Roberson, thank you for joining us on Mackinac Uncensored.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What a fantastic discussion. Thank you very much to the three of you. And Tammy, I got to tell you, and Portia, for your edification, I shared with Tammy the picture of us with Santa Claus when we were 3 or 4 years old. So there's a lot of history and great friendship. The next panel, obviously, is of great importance to the both of us.
Right.
It's a topic that both inside and outside the chamber we both spend a lot of time on, which is diversity and inclusion. And, you know, again, I will quote my dear friend Tanya Allen, who talks about it being deliberate and intentional.
Right.
So I'm looking
Right.
forward to what the panel is going to discuss.
And this is just so important, many people need to realize, to our economic future.
Absolutely.
It's about diversity, but it's also about our economy.
It's a business imperative.
It definitely is. So we're going to give it to you, Nancy Kafer.
Maybe we'll go with you. Hi. Well, welcome to our panel this morning on diversity and economic inclusion. Here with me is Anika Goss, the Executive Director of Detroit Future City, and Leslie Murphy, President and CEO of Murphy Consulting Incorporated. So our panel is called Diversity and Economic Inclusion, a Business Imperative. And I think we would all agree that it should be a business imperative, but is it really a business imperative at this point in our culture?
Right. I think that's a really good question. And off camera, you would ask me, is it a business imperative? And I was like, oh yeah. And you're like, no, maybe not. And I think you're right, Nancy, that we haven't gotten there yet. And I think what's really important is that right now, paying attention to intentionality and paying attention to how we can quantify that business imperative, to actually be able to say it's not just the rhetoric around this, but that if all of southeastern Michigan can't win from new economy, from new growth, and we can't have an inclusive process, then none of us will win. And I think that that's really clear. And that begins to actually address why we need to make sure that this is, in fact, a business imperative.
Leslie?
Yeah, so my perspective is a little different. I spend most of my time in a boardroom for large public companies, and I will tell you that we are taking it very seriously. The war for talent has completely changed the way organizations think. Between that and the huge transition that's going on in every business with the technological rise and so forth. And it's forcing everybody to come back and say, how can we be successful? We can only do that with our people.
That's great.
And the talent quotient. And there is increasing recognition that unless we have diverse teams that have figured out how to not just hire with diversity, but to actually build an inclusive culture, no one's going to win.
Mm-hmm. So when you're in those rooms, what do, given that this is an accepted goal or a stated goal, what do the conversations, the intentionality around getting to that goal sound like?
Well, actually, we're all spending much more time with HR portions of the organization, but as we also speak with the business leads, that's also where they're spending a lot of time. And our conversation is around, how are you approaching it? Mm-hmm. How will we know if we're building inclusive cultures? And so we're seeing a lot more about active surveying, active retention statistics, and also looking at the makeup of the workforce. We have an oversight role, and we take it seriously, and management's taking it very seriously.
That's really good to hear, and I think we're probably at the beginning of that process, because it also then, hopefully the next phase of that will really begin to address some of the really deep-rooted structural inequities around promotion and workforce outcomes and wage increases, where we really see some of these really stark inequities, procurement. And those are the really key issues that really keep us from, so even if you are saying, okay, we need to make sure that 40% of our workforce are either Detroiters or African American or Latino or women, and we're still not really opening up
the door for minority procurement, for low-income businesses to be able to grow and participate as a result of new businesses coming into Detroit, then we haven't really made that ground that we really need in order to grow Southeast Michigan.
Right. We're early. I'll
Yeah.
give you that one.
Yeah.
But that's where it starts with, right? Is intentionality and discussion
Yes.
and oversight. And I do think there is heightened awareness around the issue.
But then there's the other piece I think you mentioned is, let's say if you have a goal of having 40% of your workforce become whatever diversity that you're hoping for, getting employees in the door is one thing, but then how do you ensure that those employees have a track to leadership, that they have a track to pay increases? Can you maybe, Leslie, talk about what you're seeing in boardrooms when you talk about how to structure not just getting through the door, but success and leadership roles and guidance of the company?
Yeah, and I've done a lot of work around this as well in a consulting role, but as we sit in the boardroom and talk about it, what we're interested in is certainly what the overall statistics are, and there's no question we're doing a lot better job at hiring than we are at bringing them through the ranks, right? Mm-hmm. That's been a historical challenge for any underrepresented group. But there are increasing best practices that have been identified with sponsorships and the right mentors at the right time, the right training, the right I call them gates. So you don't make a promotion unless you have considered a diverse candidate class. Mm-hmm. There's a number of best practices emerging, and our job as oversight is what are those, and then how well are they working? But we have a long way to go to realize the benefits of those, but it's a good start.
Yeah. So, I mean, everybody's probably familiar with that study that looked at resumes submitted with white or non-white sounding names and how folks responded differently. But I saw a recent study or article in Harvard Business Review that talked about how this unconscious bias manifests for resumes, but even in companies that say in their job postings that they prize that they're looking for diverse candidates, that unconscious bias still manifests, and so the candidate kind of gets sort of a double blow for the candidate because they've been open about maybe their background. They may have been more guarded if they were not welcomed as a diverse candidate, but then they're still getting hit with the bias. How much do you talk about unconscious bias in these boardrooms and how to get that out of the HR practice?
Yeah, it is a subject that gets discussed at a high level. What practices are you adopting? Or I'm on a board where they are actually adopting blind interviews. You know, a lot of interviews are being done by Skype, at least initial interviews, and increasingly they're actually on a Skype machine that's black, that's just a blank screen because. What they don't want to bring that bias into that interview. They don't have a name and they don't have a visual. And again, there's a lot of things that are being tried, but we all come into things with unconscious bias, and there's a lot of training going on. There's a lot of awareness around it. Won't tell you that we're there because I mean all you have to do is look at the highest corporate ranks, and we're not minorities and women are not equally represented. They just aren't.
And I think when we've looked at the numbers as well, when you begin to, really look at who's being hired and where they're living, and then wage increases as well. I think some of this, you talked a little bit about the overall data and statistics has to be incorporated into that. And so I think when we look at some of the statistics that the majority of employers for all of these new jobs that have come into Detroit are from people who are living outside of the city, we're not necessarily, I think as companies, they have to be able to say, well, then that's me too, right? Like that they're a part of that. I think it's very easy for a company to say, well, not us, because we hired Joe, and Joe lives on the east side. So it's all of the companies that are a part of that are in Detroit need to actually look both at the data and some of these intentional hiring practices as well in order to really change the trajectory on that.
Intentionality seems to be the word of the conference this year, and I hope that it's
and I'm
something
excited.
people really think about because things don't just fall into line unless you pay that close attention to them and you're conscious of what you're doing, and that's the best way to work on unconscious bias too, right? Is to try to detect it within yourself, because we all, as you said, we all have this. But one of the things you talked about the sort of homogeny of still the higher echelons of corporate leadership, and it's not just overwhelmingly white, it's still overwhelmingly male. There aren't that many female CEOs, and I wonder, we're starting to talk a little bit more about talking about family-friendly workplace practices, which of course, with all due respect to dads who are doing the heavy lifting, mostly it's women who are doing disproportionately childcare and child rearing, elder care, and all these things. What are things we need to be thinking about as we try to diversify racially and ethnically and by gender as well? What are I know that we're both moms. I don't know if you've had the same. Let me delve into your personal life. But, so I know that we've probably all encountered this
disproportionate burden.
Yeah. So
meetings at 8 o'clock that you can't get to because you've got to take a kid to school.
Well, and I think that's one of the quickest ways when a workplace says it's family friendly, one of the quickest ways to find out whether it means that is what time do you expect employees to be here? Because if you had to take a kid to school at 8, you can't be at work at 7:30 or 8. So what are other things that we need to be considering to make sure that we keep mothers in the workplace and not dropping out and destabilizing economically their families or their children's lives?
Yeah, I think what we have to do is give voice to the workers. And I think it's a really important inclusive practice in every workplace for all issues, right? But we need to be able to be okay with saying, I can't make an 8 o'clock meeting, can we do it at 9? I remember consulting my calendar as if I needed to consult it. Well, I can't be there at 7:30. Let's make it 8:15 or 8:30, right? But you did it behind the cloak. Well, nowadays we're just hearing about the needs, right? It's now in vogue for the dads to leave to go coach soccer or basketball. And so we're starting to see that openness, but I think we need to develop our own confidence and voice that says, I can be here, but I can't be here until then.
I also think that there's, for me, if you step back from it a little bit, I have a really small nonprofit, and we deal with this in my own organization. We have a really small nonprofit of 12 people, and we had 4 babies in a year and a half, and so we had to, it was more than just how can I make my young women leaders feel valued in the company, you know what I mean, and make sure that we had sort of diverse practices that valued mothers, but as a business practice, I want the best talent in the organization, and so I really want to attract talent whether or not you're having a baby. And so if you're having a baby but you're the expert in your field, I'm going to make it really easy for you to go and have the baby, for you to do whatever you need to do and bring your baby to whatever it takes, because I want you to come and still be a part of my company. And so it's a different, it's not just accommodating women. No. It's actually really attracting talent and maintaining talent.
And that's an important way to flip that conversation.
Yeah.
You're not helping someone out. You're ensuring that your organization continues to retain the best talent.
That's right.
And that probably rings true at every part of this conversation when we're looking at, you're not doing a favor to diverse candidates by hiring them. You're making sure that you're getting the best possible people to bring value to your business.
Exactly.
And in this day and age, talent is where success lies for companies.
Exactly.
And it is the conversation of the year, of the day, and it's going to be for the foreseeable future, right? And so it is all about that. We also understand a lot better the cost of turnover, the cost of acquiring new employees and bringing them up to speed. And as that knowledge base has grown, I think we've all gotten much more aware of these are our assets, and this is the most important thing to our success.
Well, we are almost out of time here, but one takeaway from each of you for the folks who have been kind enough to follow along here about what they need to keep in mind as they go forward in their business to ensure that they're getting to that goal of diversity and economic inclusion?
Yeah, I really want to go back to this idea of connecting minority procurement and workforce outcomes as part of a economic ecosystem, right? That we need to really think about, this has to be more than just hiring, hiring a certain number of minorities to be able to meet a quota. We need to really think about how are we contributing and growing our full economic ecosystem with diverse procurement as well as workforce outcomes.
Leslie, the last word is yours.
Yeah, so my last word would be, yes, I think we need to think about diversity in everything we do and make sure that we have diverse participation in every conversation. But more importantly, once we get a diverse population, we need to figure out how to build an inclusive culture that really values the differences and the benefits that diversity can bring to more success for the entity.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks everyone who's been watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I think that those final words by Leslie Murphy, the importance of an inclusive culture, is something that we just have to keep repeating, and what the benefits are that will come from that.
Absolutely. When you talk about cultural shifts and ecosystems, the next panel I think will be phenomenally interesting to everyone viewing at home and those in the parlor, as we're talking about the cannabis industry in the state of Michigan. I think that everyone, Tammy, is now recognizing that this business is here, it's going to happen, and so how the state adopts this new industry and the jobs that can be created, the tax revenue that can be created, and the many health and wellness benefits that come from the industry, the next few years are going to be very interesting.
This is going to be a great discussion, and we can't wait to hear it.
You guys take it away.
Hi there. I'm Michael Lee, Managing Editor of Crane's Detroit Business. We're going to be talking about growing Michigan's cannabis economy. I am joined today by Michael Elias, who is the CEO of Michigan Pure Med, which is doing business as Common Citizen, and Robin Schneider, the CEO of the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association. As this industry develops, we're going to hit obstacles. What are the most urgent obstacles to overcome for this to grow into an industry that benefits Michigan and its economy?
I'll start. Right now, I think our biggest obstacle is the lack of product supply that's available in the regulated market. And I think that Governor Whitmer took the necessary steps to speed up our program and the production with her executive order, creating the new marijuana regulatory agency and charging them with issuing state licenses. Our hope is that they'll be able to issue enough grow licenses and move that along so that our provisioning center members will be well supplied.
Yeah. So some of the short-term issues, to your point, I agree wholeheartedly. The long-term issues, today we're at a shortage, tomorrow we're oversupplying the market. And that's my biggest concern, is that as more operators flood the space, that price per pound comes down. And the cost of compliance, it's one of the most expensive startups in the history of mankind. So the idea of maintaining that compliance and maintaining a high-quality product in a mass production scenario is going to require some quality improvement. And so if we're constantly fighting with the gray market and the black market, it'll be very hard to sustain a good quality product, and oversupply will drive black market sales, which is what we're seeing in Oregon. So there's a number of case studies. We don't need to guess. We know that if we don't find a way to restrict in some way without kiboshing the little guy, I think we run the problem of Oregon.
From a policy standpoint, how does the government influence that supply?
Sure. I think, obviously right now, our provisioning centers are running out of product. Patients are struggling to get access to a adequate variety of product. And so where we're at now, with adult use just around the corner, it feels like we're pretty far away from having an adequate supply. I'm more concerned, obviously, with making sure we have adequate supply now so that patients have access to their medicine, so that when adult use program takes shape, that that there's going to be enough facilities up and running to supply the market demand. And with that being said, in the adult use law, there is a mechanism in there where the department can stop allowing for the expansion of recreational marijuana grows. And so when we get to that time when the market is well supplied, I think that would be up to the department to decide to not allow expansion at that point.
So, I mean, some things we can look at, I mean, there's some case studies out in Colorado where we can take some common sense pointers. Right now, operators out there, there's a saturation of operators, but they can still control the price per pound by restricting supply, by making sure that anyone who's producing cannabis must have 80% of their inventory spoken for and sold before they can put another seed in the ground. I mean, so we don't need to find, hardcore policy strategies. We can get to the regulatory space and really try to finesse it a bit so that we can be mindful of just oversupply in the market.
Why do we need to regulate that? We don't regulate corn and wheat planting. I mean, what is different about cannabis? Is this a temporary measure and eventually things will even out and it will be a free market business like any other? I mean, we're talking about limiting the number of people who can get into it.
Yeah. Do you want to take this?
So in my opinion, in about 5 years, I think that the borders will start falling. And my hope is that Michigan businesses will be well regulated and compliant enough to be able to supply other states as well. We're pretty far behind, but we were just in Washington, D.C. Last week lobbying on the banking issue, and there was also a lot of talk about national legalization, which I think is in the near future. And I'm hopeful that Michigan companies will be well positioned to compete when that is an option for them.
Yeah. So food and drug are heavily regulated by the FDA at this point. So the idea that when we think of FDA GMP, which is good manufacturing practice, is a significantly important standard when you're talking about developing mass consumption of things that you consume. And right now, we have no regulations. There's not one state in the U.S. that is pushing for GMP regulations on operators like myself. And what you're seeing is a significant number of recalls, and we haven't even started. The industry has barely even started, and we're seeing recalls. So my biggest concern isn't so much to restrict, obviously restricting supply is really important for the sustainability of the industry, but safety is a primary concern. So what I'm asking is for the state of Michigan to start looking at bringing GMP into the cannabis space. The post-mortem assessment of defects, which is our lab testing model today, the sampling techniques are not sufficient to represent what's happening in the batch because you have to destroy samples to actually test it. And so you're not getting a representation of what the batch is, and therefore you cannot essentially take those results and extrapolate them to the rest of the batch. And that's why we're seeing high rates of contamination. So to be proactive, just like the FDA would for food and drug, if it's good enough for food and drug, why wouldn't it be good enough for cannabis? We're talking about a drug that today patients are taking. These patients are already immunocompromised, and we're further compounding the issue by not creating a quality product. And so Common Citizen is building GMP on day one. There's a significant cost to doing that, but we feel that it'll position us not just for the Michigan market to deliver high quality product, but for the national market. And it also, in Michigan, there are very few states that have GMP in cannabis. The only way you can sell to international markets is by being GMP. So that would open the doors to international trade when in fact it does come. And GMP is not something that you can just turn on overnight. There's a culture from a human resource standpoint that needs to be embedded to ensure the safe handling of product. There's the facility implications where the design of the facility plays heavily into contamination and restricting defects in the actual manufacturing process.
You mentioned banking. I think it's pretty well known that federal law prohibits banks from dealing with the cannabis industry. How close are we? Where do we stand on some changes of that on the federal level? You said you were in Washington recently. Where
Sure.
does
So
that
we are making some progress in the banking area. Representative Robbie, for instance, introduced a House resolution about 2 weeks ago asking the Congress to pass the Safe Banking Act. That resolution passed the House of Representatives the following week. Our team went to Washington, D.C. with the National Cannabis Industry Association and our counterparts from other states and did some real hands-on lobbying, asking our Michigan congressmen and women to vote in support of the Safe Banking Act. I do think there's some great progress being made there. With that being said, there are federal guidelines for banking in the cannabis space. And so there are some banks that are usually credit unions that hire extra staff and actually do the federal reporting. It is a very high cost to our members to do that. And, really, at the end of the day, our cannabis businesses are highly regulated, legal, compliant businesses. What they go through just to get a license demonstrates how responsible they are. To force those business owners to operate in the second largest market in the country, projected to be $1 billion industry in this state alone, to be operating in all cash is not fair to them. It's not fair to their employees, and it puts people at risk for their safety. So we're absolutely concerned about people having to pay their assessment fees, taxes in all cash, payroll in cash, and we want to see that tightened up and our members afforded the safety of banking like any other business is allowed.
I've talked to folks who run dispensaries, provisioning centers, and that's the main thing they want people to know is, no, I don't have $1 million in cash, behind my front door.
Yeah.
Well,
It's a big concern for them. I wonder if you could talk a little bit. We've legalized adult use, recreational marijuana, whatever you want to call it. How is that affecting and going to affect the existing medical market? Are they going to continue to operate as two separate things? How is that going to cross over?
So from a clinical standpoint, I'm a healthcare guy, 22 years running in the healthcare space, and recently, before I got into cannabis, I ran a 450-bed quaternary facility. There isn't a lot of evidence-based research that differentiates a rec product from a medicinal product. And yet we're looking at developing two separate regs to do what? They're both, from a clinical standpoint, from an evidence-based standpoint, are exactly the same. And so I think it's a problem from a process standpoint to have two separate protocols and regulations for each one of these, and it just doesn't make any sense. But what we're seeing is a significant redeployment of revenue by some of the bigger operators into R&D, the bottomless pit of R&D, and we're starting to see some clinical effects tied to certain strains, but we're in our infancy in terms of really understanding that.
That's right. As far as how the adult use program will be rolled out, I know that the marijuana regulatory agency is working hard to get those draft rules out, and I'm confident that they will do their best to ensure that we have a smooth transition from our medical program into adult use. One of the things that is in the language of the adult use law is that a medical facility can apply right away when the department makes the applications available. They get to apply right away for their adult use license. For those that haven't already applied and received a medical license, they have to wait another year. And the reason that we did that is because we didn't want the medical operators to lose their investment that they had put in. So we wanted to give them time to secure their adult use licenses so that there would be a smooth transition for their businesses as well. With that being said, I think as we've seen in other states, with tax issues, sometimes there's two separate registers. The 3% excise tax for medical goes away, which we, when we were working on the medical law, did that on purpose because we did not want medicine to have to be taxed. And then the adult use is the 10% excise tax plus our 6% sales tax. And so the taxes will be a little bit higher for adult use. So there's software programs that can handle that or separate registers. As far as the regulations on seed to sale, I think that they'll be very similar to the medical program. There's no need to really reinvent the wheel. So I'm expecting that when those regulations come out, that they'll be very similar to what we already have in place.
What are the, over the next 5 years, what are the major mileposts that people should be looking for as this market develops? What are we going to see?
We should see an acceleration of the normalization of cannabis. And what we're seeing with new revenue streams and new products like cosmeceuticals, nutraceuticals, pet wellness. I mean, we're talking about...
What does it do for your pet?
There's a lot. It does the same thing it does for humans. When you talk about CBD or CBGN or THCV, compounds that people aren't even talking about, there's THC and CBDs. Everyone, that's all everyone talks about. There's a lot of anti-inflammatory evidence of other compounds.
So for your dog's arthritis.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah, you got medicinal.
I'll give an example. I've been doing some running on the island. It's a beautiful place to run. I brought a topical salve to use on my ankles when I'm done running because they swell. Completely legal. Doesn't cause any kind of impairment, but certainly has a medicinal benefit to help me with when I'm, working on my health.
And another, looking ahead, you start to see more acceptance of the products, but you also start to see more sophisticated operators improving their operations in the way that we haven't seen in decades. And because of the competition, the regulatory environment, you're going to start to see a higher quality product.
Yes.
This is a manufacturing business, and all the industrial engineering principles apply. And so you'll start to see it look like any other CPG when it comes to branding and marketing, and the idea of bringing horticulture and botanists, and we have pharmacologists, toxicologists on staff. I have biochemists on staff. We got over 400 resources in the next 2 years, and they're highly sophisticated individuals. Jobs, just in Michigan alone, this is a sleeping giant. She talked about, the second biggest market on the medicinal side. It is humongous when you think of the tourists. We have 120 million people that show up to this state every year. That's more than Florida. And when you look at Colorado, they get about 80 million, and they're a $1.6 billion market. 60% of that 80 million drives that 1.6 billion. And so we are seeing tourists showing up, and they have in Michigan, we have reciprocity. So that means if you are a card holder in any other state, we honor that card, and you can buy up to 2.5 ounces. I think that's still the case. So that's a significant, just the medical tourism, I think is going to be something that you see in the next few years. And I can keep going.
And when you talked about the normalization, I agree. Just our time here on the island, our association came up. We had a reception, here on the island. A lot of public officials came, their staffers. Our members came up. We had a great time.
Did you have product?
No.
I mean, I noticed there's alcohol everywhere.
There's an ordinance on this island. You
really?
cannot have product.
Really?
Yes,
Interesting.
Yes.
We didn't pass out any product yet this year. Perhaps, we'll be able to put some, bling into the gift bags
They
that
roll out
everyone
the
gives
drink
out
carts.
for the
Yeah.
Right.
days.
Unmedicated bling.
But absolutely. But it is becoming mainstream, and everybody's very comfortable with the topic compared to 10 years ago when we first started working on this issue. Our public officials just weren't even ready to have the conversation. Today, they're comfortable with it. They don't all support it, but they're not so afraid to talk about it anymore.
How long do you think it will take before that normalization really internalizes for people? I have a 19-year-old son who was looking for a job this summer.
Yeah.
And at one point he said, well, maybe I could get a job in the weed business. And I said, well, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah. I'd say lightning
so,
speed. Lightning
yeah.
speed. The conversations we're having, are topical. It's very benign, but yet improves your situation immediately. The product kind of sells itself. You get into the nutraceuticals, wellness space, it's a very easy conversation. As a healthcare guy, the other thing I want to, and we kind of talked about this before we got on, physicians have been whispering in the ears of patients who have multiple comorbidities, very complicated medical schedules, that cannabis could be an alternative. They have never come out and said it because they're worried about their licenses, but there are a number of physicians who feel strongly about this type of approach. When you think of pharmaceuticals, 77% of all pharmaceuticals have come from botanicals, plants, and the rest come from fungi and bacteria. So the thought that the plant is not an alternative, it just doesn't make any sense.
We've got about 1 minute left, so real quick, what if you had to lay odds, what do you think are the odds we'll see national legalization in the next 5 years?
I'll let you go first.
Absolutely going to happen.
Really?
And with that being said, I would just want to thank the Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce for allowing us to be members and for being so welcoming and supportive of us as the industry is growing. I think it's so important that we need help from groups like the Chamber to provide us with tips and resources as we build a new industry. So I'm so grateful to be here.
Yeah, I think that's a decent estimate. I'll buy that. 5 years feels right, but look, the genie's out of the bottle. It's not coming back in.
Seems to me that once you have more than half the states,
44,
which
right
we already
now.
have, most of them it's legal somewhere.
Yeah,
should just be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're out of time. This has been Michael Elias and Robin Schneider. I'm Michael Lee, Managing Editor of Crane's Detroit Business, and thank you very much.
That was such a great discussion, and it is such an important new industry for our economy. I know you know a lot about it, Dennis. I think we can't talk enough about it, provide enough awareness about how good it can be for our economy.
I agree, and as we talk about the potential of over the horizon of the next 5 years or so, it being federally legal and acceptable, it'll be very interesting to see the role that cannabis plays from a programming standpoint year after year here at the conference.
Right. Well, speaking of the economy, here's another issue that's really important to Michigan's economy, the impact of tariffs and trade. Daniel, it's yours.
Good morning, Daniel.
Good morning. Daniel Howes from the Detroit News. I'm with Joe Comartin, who's the Consul General of Canada in Detroit, and Brad Williams, who's the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Detroit Regional Chamber. Well, gentlemen, we are here to talk about tariffs, and we are doing this on a minute-by-minute basis. As some people may know, the president threatened to put 5% tariffs on Mexico, on all goods coming in from Mexico, starting in June sometime. And June is like tomorrow. And the markets are down 300 on the Dow. General Motors is down 4%, Ford's down 3%, FCA's down 4%. And a lot of people are wondering where we go next. What are you hearing through your channels, Joe? I'm sure you are getting some reports from your folks as to what this may or may not mean.
Yeah, I don't want to be facetious about this, but I really wanted to spend last night watching the basketball game. But instead, I was reading all these briefing notes on what the president has done, because it's 5%. The proposal is to slap this 5% tariff on, I think it's June the 10th, but then it's an escalating one over the next several months, all the way up to potentially 50% on all of the products coming in, all the cargoes, all the shipments coming in from Mexico into the United States. It's got the potential to completely paralyze the trade between Mexico and the United States. The requirement on the business community side of having to show whether these products, in fact, are subject to this tariff, and the onus is on them to do that, is basically going to paralyze the transport of goods between the two countries.
And they're pumping in about, I think, $1 billion a day from Mexico into the United States in terms of goods, right?
That's right. That's a good figure, yeah. It's accurate.
How do you think the government in Ottawa and in Mexico City will react to this?
I don't have a sense. I haven't had any direction from our government as to what they're going to do. We're not impacted on it directly as a government, but I have to think that Mexico, at this point, at the very least, will suspend any move to ratify the USMCA. They were holding off doing that until the other tariffs were lifted, which happened 10 days ago. And now the president has moved against them again. So I imagine at the very least, USMCA is suspended in Mexico at the present time.
Brad, why do you think the president is taking this action, even as he's got administration officials who've been pressing on Capitol Hill to begin the process towards ratification of the USMCA or NAFTA 2.0?
Yeah, I mean, if I could figure out the motivations of the White House, I'd be a far wealthier man. I think the thing that I find interesting here is, like other trade actions that the president has taken, you see people say, don't panic. The market will go down for a couple days and then it will resume its somewhat steady climb. But what concerns me is that we seem to have these every couple weeks, where we're going to have a couple bad market days because whether it's steel and aluminum tariffs or these most recent Mexican tariffs, at some point we have to have a foreign policy that has some other tool for meeting our goals beyond just slapping the tariffs on and going through several days of market disruption. At some point, we need to find other avenues to address our challenges or our concerns with our friends and neighbors in North America.
So what do these tariffs mean? Both perspectives, I think, are important here. For Michigan and for trade between Canada and the United States, if they continue. I mean, what does this mean for the manufacturers, auto companies, suppliers, other industrial companies that maybe aren't in the value chain, if this continues?
Well, I mean, there's no question that we're living on a planet where the chain is quite clear of how integrated it is. As we have the slowdown at the Mexican border, it impacts manufacturing here in Michigan, Ohio, the Midwest, in the auto sector. There's just no question about that because of the way it's integrated. Parts move in both directions. Finished vehicles move in both directions, primarily out of Mexico into the United States and into Canada. And that is going to get slowed down very, very dramatically.
Can either of you characterize any kind of tone you're getting from manufacturers or picking up from auto companies about this? I mean, it's very difficult to make any kind of long-term investment decisions when you really don't know what your costs are going to be, right?
Yeah, when we talk to our members, certainly there are a number of policy choices that impact their decisions, taxes, regulatory. But the one thing that is going to freeze a manufacturer is uncertainty. And we're now in 2.5 years of complete uncertainty about what our international trade situation is going to be. I mean, that is one of the reasons why getting USMCA across the finish line is so important, so that these companies that are making multi-decade decisions have some certainty as to what our trade relationship is going to be within North America. Unfortunately, this news that we saw last night only makes that less likely to happen. If I'm a member of Congress in Mexico, why am I going to vote to ratify USMCA and give the U.S. a huge trade win when, on the other hand, the president is imposing 5% tariffs on every good that crosses the border? It's kind of beyond reason, I guess.
I think the other thing, Daniel, you have to appreciate it for the auto sector in particular, is that in terms of what's going on right now, I mean, we've got a major shift occurring in the auto sector, moving away from the internal combustion engine to electric cars. And I mean, those are tough decisions for CEOs and the senior people in the boards in those companies. And then now you pile on this uncertainty around tariffs. It just makes their job really, really difficult. I think, I know that there are a lot of decisions that are being suspended. Some CEOs are taking the risk that this is what's going to happen with no guarantees that, in fact, that's where the economy is going to go because of this kind of uncertainty that tariffs impose.
What always mystifies me about this, the president's approach to tariffs and the markets, is that they can't kind of cancel each other out. I think he is betting on the fact that if he gets a NAFTA 2.0 and is tough with China, which I think has some bipartisan support depending on what the issue is, he'll be okay electorally. On the other hand, he sees the stock market performance as a barometer of his presidency, right? Yeah. And you can see when he'll put out a tweet, say, yeah, you know, we're going to kick these things forward 180 days, like he did with the
European.
China, the European. And all of a sudden the market goes up. And I'm like, okay. So what about the political calculation? He will not be elected president if he doesn't carry the state of Michigan, probably. I heard this week.
I think that's a fair assumption.
I heard this week up here, people think, I talked to, in fact, I think I asked John Kasich behind the scenes, I said, do you think he's going to carry Ohio? He said, absolutely. So, okay, he carries Ohio, but if he doesn't get Michigan or Pennsylvania, so how does this help him in Michigan?
Well, I don't think it does. I think he needs to run for re-election in 2020 with a signature policy goal beyond the tax cuts, because the tax cuts were so long ago people will have forgotten about them. This is his chance to get a signature policy achievement, is getting USMCA across the finish line. It was going to be a difficult fight with the Democratic House of Representatives anyways. This doesn't make it any easier. And so I would, from a political perspective and a policy perspective, but since we're talking about the politics right now, suggest taking a long look at what the ramifications are of these choices.
Do you think in Parliament, before this little Mexico thing in the last 24 hours, were there enough votes to pass USMCA in Parliament?
Oh, the votes were definitely there. It was more a question of whether we could get it done quickly enough in order to deal with our coming federal election. I was very involved in Parliament for a good number of years in the process, part of it in particular as Deputy Speaker. It would be very, very difficult, and I think Canada has to make a decision now as to whether they're going to stand in partnership with Mexico and say, you just can't do that. If you're doing it to Mexico, you're going to do it to us the next time. So I assume the Prime Minister and the Cabinet right now is discussing whether, in fact, they're going to spend, because we initiated, Daniel, so I appreciate, we initiated this week. The bill actually went before the Parliament this week, and they've got it on a timeline where they think they can squeeze it through before the end of June, when our Parliament will stop, and then we'll go to the election. So the decision now at the level of the Cabinet and the Prime Minister will be whether we just suspend that process in solidarity with Mexico.